Shabbat Shalom. In the bad old days of the early 20th century, prisons were not as enlightened as they are today and often resorted to cruel corporal punishment in order to intimidate the prisoners. It happened at one such prison that 3 prisoners were caught trying to escape, and they were brought before the warden there in the courtyard in front of all the other inmates. And the warden said, "All right, Jones, Smith, and Goldstein, you have been caught trying to escape, and that means you have to be punished. And of course, the punishment for that is 3 lashes with the whip. But we are a modernizing prison, and I have been instructed to allow you to have a coating for your back so that it will not be quite so bad. So, Jones, what would you like on your back?" And Jones is like, I don't know, oil. "Fine, put oil on him, boys. Tie him to the stake, strip his shirt, and whack! Ah! Whack! Ah! Whack! Ah! All right, take him out of here. Get him to the infirmary. We all have him infected. We need him back to work on Monday. All right, and Smith. Smith, what do you want?" "Nothing." "Smith, I'm giving you the option here of having something in your back. I don't want nothing." "All right, tough guy, fine. Tie him up to that post." "All right, whack! That's 1. Whack! 2. Whack! 3. All right, fine. Whatever, tough guy. Get out of here. Get out of here. All right, Goldstein, your turn. We hear you were the ringleader. What do you want on your back?" "On my back? On my back, I want Smith." All right, so we don't do flogging anymore. But the Torah talks about flogging. And we can actually learn an awful lot from it. It may sound counterintuitive. It's become much in disrepute for good reason. But there is much the Torah is trying to teach us about how we treat each other when we talk about this most painful of corporal punishments. First of all, let me just help you understand why the Torah used flogging as a punishment at all in the ancient world. It was because the range of punishments were relatively limited. There was no such thing as a prison. Prisons are a very modern invention. You might have a jail holding a person during the trial period until the evidence had been gathered, the trial had taken place, and then sentence carried out. But that was usually in the ancient world a matter of days. Nobody went to prison for years. That just simply never occurred to anyone as a possibility. There was not the infrastructure to support a prison population. And instead, normal punishments in the ancient world were either death, fines, or some form of corporal punishment, of physical pain short of death. Judaism was rather advanced for its time in saying that those corporal punishments should not include death, and that those corporal punishments should not, on the whole, involve the permanent maiming of a person. There's one very special exception, but that's a whole other conversation. So flogging was considered to be a fairly mundane and reasonable way to punish a person when other punishments were not appropriate, either as being too lenient or being too strict. Now, what can we learn from this? Well, were you paying attention when I was chanting to the Torah, or were you thinking about some other activities? What are the rules on flogging, on makot, as it's called in the Torah? No more than 39 is the rabbinic interpretation. The Torah itself sets the limit at 40, and we reduced it in Jewish practice to 39, because the Torah never said you had to give 40. So therefore, we reduced it to 39 to make sure we wouldn't accidentally go higher than that. And that is already telling you something very significant, if I can get my tallit straightened out here. That there was a limit. That there was a maximum amount of flogging that could be sentenced at all. That the punishment was not what we felt like. The punishment had a cap in order that justice could be done, but not injustice in the pursuit of justice. And this is a concept that I think really in the modern world we still struggle with. that we feel that as we pursue justice, the entire focus is on the carrying out of the punishment against the criminal. This is a person, let's use the clearest examples, who have actually committed crimes worthy of the punishment they are about to receive, and we are fanatical in making sure that they get that punishment. And the concept that occasionally they might get over-punished doesn't really occur to us as being a detriment in the system. After all, they're criminals. They deserve to be punished. Therefore, if their punishment happens to exceed what the law was asking for, or even what morality is dictating, then generally we tend to not lose a lot of sleep over what might have happened. Oh, okay, maybe, they were kept longer than they should have. The parole was deliberately ignoring some of the evidence that could have gotten them released early. Maybe the prison conditions were inhumane and they were beaten, attacked by other prisoners. Maybe they were overworked in the prison the prison work programs. Remember, that is the only legal form of slavery still allowed in the American system under the Constitution. There was a carve-out when we got rid of slavery that allows it for prisoners, and it still is practiced. Well, most of us go, they're criminals, right? They are convicted criminals. Let's not worry about the innocent who get caught up in by mistake, but most people in prison did commit the crime that they were convicted of. So why should I care if their punishment exceeds what the punishment was supposed to be? Well, the Torah comes along and says, yeah, well, God cares. God cares whether their punishment exceeds. Why? What happens if we overflog someone? Because the Torah gives us, quite surprisingly, an explanation of why this is problematic. It doesn't just say, don't do it, like the Torah usually does for most of our commandments. It gives us a in order that explanation. Anybody remember the second part of the verse that gives us our limit on the whipping of why we don't over-flog? Do not overly disgrace who? The person who's being punished. So close. To not overly disgrace the person who is being punished. But the Torah is, as always, precise in its language. And the Torah doesn't call them a person. The Torah calls them achicha, your brother. Your brother. Yes, the criminal is still your brother in the eyes of the Torah, and you have an obligation to not overly degrade them. Yes, the flogging or any form of punishment is going to be degrading. They've committed a crime after all. They are going to feel shame and humiliation for what they did. That is part of teshuvah, of their own repentance. But to over-punish would to degrade them, would make them seem insignificant, to more literally translate the Hebrew. It would desecrate them in your eyes. Well, what's wrong with that? They're prisoners, right? They're criminals, literally guilty. Again, we're not dealing with the border cases where they might have been an innocent person caught up. Don't they deserve to be as degraded in my sight as possible? I, a good law-abiding citizen of the community, I shouldn't be forced to breathe the same air as this reprehensible reprobate. Why should I care whether they are overly degraded?
Because the point of all this punishment is to rehabilitate the people, or at least convince them not to commit the same crimes again and become functioning members of society.
Right, because what's the function of all of this justice, of all of this law and order? It is not to degrade a criminal. It is to, as the Torah puts it, prevent crime in the first place, as well as to carry out justice for the person who has committed the crime, but ideally to reform them. Because that is Judaism's great promise. That yes, at the moment they are convicted of a crime, but they are still your brother. They were your brother before, and they will be your brother after the flogging is done. And if we want them to be in society, not committing crimes, we have to make sure that even in perhaps especially in our carrying out justice against them, that they never forget that we still consider them to be our brother. This is not saying no one should get punished. The Torah is very clear and quite heavy-handed for many of its punishments. But it is saying while carrying out the punishment, foremost in your mind is not a desire for vengeance, a desire for punishment. It is a desire to preserve your brother while administering justice so that they will return. If anybody who committed a crime would be flogged, male or female. There were some slight differences in how things were carried out to avoid excessive embarrassment for women. That was a little different than men. But women as well received lashes when considered appropriate in the ancient law code. So the term your brother is not meant as a gender exclusive. It is meant as an emotional connection to a person that in the modern world many of us simply label a criminal. We categorize them as a different type of human being. They're a criminal, I'm not. They are fundamentally different than I. And the Torah says, no, they made a big mistake. Not just getting caught. They made a mistake of doing whatever they did. But they are still just like you. And therefore, they deserve the same level of compassion, understanding, and justice that will lead to punishment, but will not lead to excessive degradation. Now, most of you are probably thinking, oh, it's all very good, flogging in the ancient world, we probably don't do that so much, and we can talk another time about flaws within the modern prison system, which creates many evils that we still are trying to wrestle with. But I'd like to have you shift a little bit more personally because it is very easy to offload the whole conversation onto what happens to others. And the whole point of this passage in the Torah is that we think of those others as brothers and thus potentially ourselves. And nowhere is that more poignant than as we are approaching our own day in court. That's right. All of you are up for your court date. It's called Rosh Hashanah. All of you are going to stand in front of the judge, and the judge is going to have each one of you pass in front, and he will pass judgment on you. And you will be sentenced. Now, in that sentencing, in that judging, how would you like God to handle your case? Would you like God to care about you? Would you like God to simply call you a criminal? All of us have committed transgressions at some point over the last year. Not a single one of us that has not violated Torah, at least to some degree. Would you like God to then throw you into that bucket and throw that bucket into a hole and walk away? Or would you like God to still show compassion, to show understanding, to, yes, maybe mete out punishment if we are not rectifying our behavior, if we are not doing teshuvah and returning to God wholeheartedly, that yes, there will be some form of punishment, but would you like that punishment to be excessive? Would you like to suffer the same punishment as somebody else who had committed a much graver transgression? Or would you like it to be proportional and fair? Would you like to be degraded in your punishment? And if the answer is yes, keep that to yourself. That's your own personal preferences. Most of us would not like to be humiliated in that process. You see, when we imagine ourselves being judged by God, it becomes very clear to us what kind of judge we want, what kind of process we would like, what evidence we think is worthy, and what type of sentence we might believe would be fair and carried out against us. But when we sit in judgment of others, suddenly we become hanging judges. Suddenly we become very unforgiving of others and willing to have them suffer whatever possible pain is imaginable because they are reprehensible. We want justice for ourselves and vengeance for them. This is not just a problem of our treatment of criminal system. This is also a problem in our own interpersonal. We make a little mistake. We accidentally said something we weren't supposed to say. Maybe it was a secret that someone had asked us to keep and we blabbed. I mean, come on, it happens, right? I mean, it's not such a big deal. Why are you so still upset with me about this? On the other hand, when someone does something similar to us, we are going to drag them through the streets of our public opinion, trying to make sure that all of our family, all of our friends, everybody knows what a horrible, horrible person they are, regardless of how trivial that problem might have been. It is easy to excuse our own behavior, and it is easy to be excessive in the punishment we want for others who have behaved badly to us. And Rosh Hashanah asks us to flip that in our spirit, to be harder on ourselves, to hold ourselves to as high a standard as possible of what did I do wrong last year and how can I fix it, and to be as forgiving of each other as possible. Not exonerating completely, but to give as much room for a person to come and seek forgiveness, to try and fix whatever had happened, rather than demanding far in excess of 40 lashes. You see, this little passage about flogging is not just part of the antiquated ideas of our Bronze and Iron Age ancestors. It is about how we relate to each other on a day-to-day basis, continuing today, even if no one picks up a whip. This is the joy and beauty that comes with the study of Torah. When you look at it not as some ancient book, but as a capsule of wisdom that has continued to vibrantly guide people towards living better lives that are more fulfilling for themselves and more healthy for their communities, then you can begin to see that it's not just about a whip. It's about our brothers. It is about each other. It is about justice and compassion. And that is always relevant. Shabbat Shalom.